Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk About Houses. I'm Todd.
I'm Juana.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about this article that came out in a Substack. I'll go ahead and show the title of it. Vacant housing lowest in census history. And this is vacant housing, both for rental housing and owner-occupied housing.
Right.
And it says, using the latest census report to make it very clear, the housing shortage is indeed real as vacancy conspiracies take foot on social media. These vacancy conspiracies also include the housing crash, vacancy conspiracies of vacant new home builders and vacant REOs that are like out there and vacant, just ready to all hit the market that don't exist. So this is by a guy named Daryl Owens. I'm going to put a link to his Substack. He's a data nerd. He's got a lot of subscribers. He basically takes data about housing and he researches and then he comes up with these opinions. The other reason, before we talk about that we're very excited is we are in our final 20 videos to 1,000. 1,000. We did. How many episodes of the radio show do you think we did?
We probably did maybe about 100.
Okay, it was a weekly show.
Yeah, we did for a couple years.
We did for a couple of years. It was live radio. It was called Talk About Houses. It was very fun. It was live real estate talk radio. It was on Saturdays, I think at noon or 1 and it was a fun show. We did it. Started in beginning of 2006, end of 2005, and I think we wrapped it up by 2007 because the REOs. We started getting all the REO listings, and we were like, hey, we don't have time for the radio show anymore. Okay, so. I went through this and read this, and it's pretty fascinating. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through these charts for this one chart, and then we're going to talk about all of the quotes from the article. Okay, his name is Daryl Owens. Like I said, his Substack is in the description. Okay, it says chronic housing shortage. Supporting rental housing fundamentals. This is actually a chart. This didn't come from him. This came from BlackRock and their analysis. Okay. If you look over there left, it says existing housing shortage, U.S. housing completions as a percentage of population. So from 1994 to 2007, new homes were being built at a rate of 0.55% to the population. So for every 200 people, every year they would build a house. And that's basically to house people, right?
Right. It's to house new family formations or new household formations. It's to house immigrants, to house people whose homes have to be replaced because either they were destroyed or they became obsolete or whatever the reason.
Yeah. Cities just said, hey, we're going to get rid of these areas and make them parks, or we're going to just condemn a whole area for whatever reason. Happens all the time.
Sure.
Okay, even in Vegas, we lost whole neighborhoods when they put freeways in. They just we're taking out these streets, houses are gone, right? Okay, 2008 to 2022, down 44%. New home completions were only 0.31% for 14 years. That's, okay, why did this happen? What caused this to happen?
So there was that whole bit of overbuilding.
Overbuilding.
Yes.
Okay, great financial crisis.
Yes. So that was part of it. The other part was that with the great financial crisis, there also came a lot of foreclosures and short sales, which ruined people's credit. So that left them ineligible for new mortgages.
Okay.
So those that didn't have the cash couldn't purchase, so they had to rent. So of course there was less demand. So all of that worked together to conspire and create this environment in which there were fewer homes being built.
Not only that, all the workers, a lot of people left the industry. Like people who were building in the industry switched careers. They said, hey, there's no job. I'm building homes. I'm going to go back to school and become some other thing.
Right. Or they went back to some other line of work that they were doing previously, whatever suited their position at the time.
Okay. The other problem is the decline in new supply of housing units. In the middle column, you can see there this is thousands annualized, but from quarter 1 of 22 to quarter 4 of 2022, as you can see, it dropped substantially. And then the occupancy. In 2010, in multifamily, only 91%, which is quite a bit. 91% of multifamily were occupied. and then now it's 96%. It's literally 96% want it is 100. Why is 96% 100%? Why is it fully occupied? People don't understand that you never technically have 100% occupancy. Why?
Well, so these are basically, like you said, 100% occupied because there really isn't any time for turnover. Like, we did not have turnover when we rented out the house last week, right?
Not for money.
No.
Really, right?
No. So, I mean, the house was vacant for an hour,
Right.
literally for an hour.
Yeah.
And it would have been vacant for zero had I allowed them to sign a lease and pay the money prior to seeing the house.
Okay, so we always have with rentals, the normal, what they say is anywhere from 4 to 5% is maximum occupancy. 4 to 5% vacancy means it's fully, that's the normal transition time you have with people going from one unit to another. You have to clean it or paint it or flip it, so it's vacant for a certain amount of time.
Right. Plus, remember, people usually are in some other sort of housing situation. So, for example, somebody sees the property and says, "Hey, yeah, I want to rent it. I want to go ahead and sign the lease right now, but my current lease doesn't expire for another 20 days, 30 days, whatever, and so I've got that period of time. So during that time, that property is vacant, even though it has been committed to somebody."
Okay, here's a quote from the article. He grabbed a bunch of census data. And this is a quote. Nationwide, the vacancy rate for owner-occupied housing is 0.8%, the lowest count on record, US Census in census history since 1956. Vacant homes for sale are posting their highest prices ever, coming off an accelerated incline since the pandemic's outbreak. This is brand new. Like, this just came out this month. This is not from last year. The news media is making much out of home prices cooling down. But if I were a homeowner, I'd remember that shortages don't pop. Remember? People have talked about the bubble popping if you have too many homes, but shortages don't pop. Okay, the pandemic's incline is cooling, but it's difficult to envision another housing bubble with so little inventory.
So, you know that the housing inventory is really, really tight when the owner occupieds are they're really not vacant. So here's an example of owner occupieds not being vacant. Generally speaking, when you sell your house, you move out, usually the week before closing, get it cleaned so you can turn it over when the property closes escrow. That is not happening as much as it used to. Probably a good portion of these properties are actually being sold with the seller in them, with the seller maintaining possession after close of escrow for some time in order to facilitate the move, which means that property is never vacant, because when that seller moves out, he's already closed escrow, the new buyer moves in the same day or the next day. So again, that speaks to that fully occupied environment that we live in as far as owner occupants.
We also know this, that 0.8% occupancy rate jives with Fannie Mae's 0.03% of homes that they foreclosed on, which is the lowest ever, 0.03%. It's 3 in every 10,000 houses Fannie Mae foreclosed on. It's literally might as well be 0, because that's an incredibly low number. We know in Vegas, which is the second highest market in the nation for foreclosures, the city of Las Vegas, we had 1 foreclosure every 3 whole days. Like, literally, there are none. Okay, here's another quote. Low interest rates fueling a buying spree during the pandemic sent the already low numbers of for sale vacant housing plummeting. Okay, this is the reason many Americans who wish to become homeowners will not have that opportunity. Okay, completely anecdotally, we know for sure a bunch of people showed up in Vegas in 2009, 10, 11 to buy homes. They bought a ton of homes. We worked with many of them. 2 different buyers, each bought 50 houses, okay, in rental houses. I think from 2020, 21, and 2, we probably personally saw more people buying rentals, not new homes, not to live in, buying rental homes in a frenzy that we hadn't seen in the previous decade, right?
Right. And they were buying both resale and new construction.
They were just trying to get anything they could get their hands on.
Yes.
They were snapping up inventory. None of these people are selling.
No.
They're not selling. Okay. And they're not like, older boomers who are going to die next year.
No.
These people are going to own these. They're going to rent these homes out forever because they probably not going to get Social Security. We'll just say most of them are either very young boomers or Gen Xers.
Gen Xers for the most part.
Gen Xers, and they don't feel they'll get Social Security, so they're making their own Social Security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then here's another one. So if the primary answer is if you want to beat private equity speculators and corporate buyers, we need to build a lot more housing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not only should we transform our zoning to allow for more housing, but the federal government should be encouraging and directly financing more investment into developing new housing. One, it's not going to happen. What's a NIMBY? Tell them what a NIMBY is.
Not in my backyard.
So the people who are saying we should build new housing are going to be like, well, but we don't want too much new housing because we don't want to drop our property values. And the new housing that's always proposed, this is a big thing in the Bay Area, is always lower income. Mm-hmm. But no one wants the lower income housing near them. There was they were talking about building like 400 or 500 lower income housing units in part of the Bay Area, like Cupertino or something like that. And everyone was in an outroar. No, we don't build these things. Mm-hmm. And they actually got it stopped.
Right.
Right.
But look, it's not just the not in my backyard. I mean, there are also other considerations, right? There's the infrastructure consideration because, can the infrastructure handle that? Certainly you can put up housing faster than the infrastructure can keep up with that. And that means roads, it means services, it means schools, it means fire protection, it means ambulances, it means all of that. So, yes, you can put up housing, but then, that is detrimental to everyone's quality of life, both the existing people and the new people, because now you don't have the infrastructure to support all the new residents.
Okay. The next chart is very interesting. This is actually BlackRock put this out themselves. Mm-hmm. They have a public pitch deck. And in this public pitch deck, they show where they bought all the houses and by state, and then they have specific regions they focused on. As you can see, they were very, very strong in two parts of the country, West and South. Mm-hmm. In that pitch deck, which I read, it was painfully long. The West and South have the highest job growth and the highest wage growth. And they're all these hundreds of analysts that they pay for to analyze markets and everything, decided that if they bought houses in these markets that were cheap, rents would go up the most. Mm-hmm. And there would be home shortages and they would be able to profit from this. Mm-hmm. And they've acquired these things so cheaply and they're getting so much in rent because their basis for acquiring them is so low. They're actually making a killing. Mm-hmm. They would be stupid to sell these things because remember, they would have to pay income taxes on the difference between what they paid for them. They'd probably depreciate them too. They would just have this massive tax liability. Mm-hmm. So there's almost no incentive for BlackRock or any of these Wall Street funds or anybody else to sell these things. But you could see where they bought. They bought in Vegas, Phoenix, Denver, Dallas, that's Atlanta, and some markets in Florida. And that's, of course, Miami. They just bought it. And of course, they bought all over. They just buy it in specific markets, but they bought all over. And, you can see that they acquired quite a number of houses. The number of houses they acquired is a substantial number. Mm-hmm. I think they did this based on a video I made in 2010 or 11, where I said if a corporation should just, buy 200,000 houses with one check. If you could just write a check and buy $200,000, 200,000 houses, they should do that. And they basically probably watched the video and did it. They didn't ask me though to help them get any of the houses.
Well, it was you and Warren Buffett, right? Warren
Buffett. I mean, do you guys know who that is? If you've heard of him, I mean, some people know who he is. Some people don't know who he is.
But everyone knows who you are.
Warren Buffett did say that. I did a video about it. We talked about it. But anyway, okay, here's another quote from the article. So this quote comes from the idea that this is artificial, that these corporations that bought these houses they're just holding on to them and they're not really being used or whatever. And they're going to eventually come back on the market as non-performing assets, whatever. So here's the quote. So there isn't actual evidence to suggest the housing shortage is artificially imposed by corporations not leasing out their properties. right? That they just bought them to flip. They're actually leasing them out. At an all-time low in empty homes for sale nationwide, and all-time lows in empty houses for rent in the Western U.S., alongside universally low vacancy rates throughout the country, suggests we have a severe housing shortage, and corporations are profiting off it. One, a severe housing shortage. How does the housing market crash? How does any market crash when you have a severe shortage of the one thing everybody demands? Like, don't crashes happen because of a massive imbalance where you either have demand disappears, right? Or supply increases to some ridiculous amount?
So yes, I mean, crashes happen because of a severe imbalance, but not the imbalance that we have. And, if you think that the data from BlackRock or from the census is somehow self-serving, there are other data points, right? You can check the post office. The post office keeps track of that too. They keep track of vacant addresses, right? Because they deliver mail to all of us. So they would know who's vacant and who's not. The other people who keep track of vacant properties are utility companies.
Yep.
They certainly know who's vacant and who's not, because vacant properties tend to have utilities that are not active. So all these things, all these places and all these institutions have the data points as far as what's vacant and what's not, and they're all reporting the same thing. So one would make a reasonable conclusion that if all of their data is about the same, then chances are that that data is accurate. Now, I'm not saying that the Crash Bros are wrong. I'm just saying that the data doesn't support what the Crash Bros are saying as far as this huge inventory of vacant properties.
100% of their data is 100% made up. It's literally all made up. We did another video where we actually showed the actual number of Fannie foreclosures in a year, all the REOs that are on JP Morgan Chase's and Wells Fargo's balance sheet. There's none. They don't have them. Nobody has them. There haven't been foreclosures. Lowest foreclosure rate in the country that we've ever had. Vegas is the second highest market. As we mentioned, there's no foreclosures here. There's literally nothing that's going to happen other than rents are going to keep going up. Rents are going to keep going up. Period. End of story. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to get so bad where we possibly see state and federal intervention in rent control. Okay. As long as we have inflation, rents are going to go up. And inflation is real estate's best friend, because people are like, oh, inflation is going to make interest rates go up and housing's to crash. Nope, doesn't happen. Inflation does not make housing crash. Housing went up substantially in the 70s and early 80s when we had the highest inflation we ever had. Home prices skyrocketed. Home prices were up 50% from 73 to 82 when interest rates were above 10%.
Right. As a matter of fact, during the high inflation periods in the 70s and 80s, that was the time when we had the most government action regarding rent controls. And then what's happening right now, Nevada is like a prime example of that. We have high inflation. Our legislature, bless their hearts, they're in session. So they are considering all kinds of draconian rent controls that they're discussing. So all of that goes to support this, because if they were concerned about property values falling, if they were concerned about rents going down, they wouldn't be trying to cap. They would not be trying to cap rent increases. They would not be trying to cap a landlord's ability to not renew a lease, and all of these things. They're very concerned about limiting cost increases, and very concerned about providing stability to tenants.
Rental in markets where you have rent control tend to have the lowest amount of new home building. It is absolutely the wrong move to take. The first problem is every single landlord, whatever that percent max they can raise the rate is, they will raise it every year that amount. They have to, because they can't take a chance that if they don't raise rents for a couple years and then we get inflation again, now they're behind, because now they're stuck with this annual amount they can raise it. So they'll raise it every month and say, hey, I got to raise them. Sorry. You almost get forced to raise them to the max every single time.
And let me make a point here. So let's say, for example, that I have a rental and I'm getting $2,100 a month. and the lease is coming up for renewal, and I raise the rent $100 a month. That's less than 5%, right? That's a very, very reasonable rent increase. But if I know that I cannot raise the rent more than, let's say, 5% a month, then I'm going to raise that rent 5% a month, because now I'm in this situation where if I don't do this, then it's going to hurt me down the road. The other thing is, let's say that I'm in a time where I'm behind, right? My property is renting for $2,100 a month, but a comparable property is renting for $2,300 a month. Well, then I have some choices. If I can, maybe I go ahead and I throw that tenant out and put another one in at $2,300 a month. That's an option.
That's worse for tenants, by the way.
Right.
This happens in actual rent control markets.
Right.
When the tenant won't agree to the increase, they just go, fine, we'll just put a new tenant in a higher rate. And it forces the tenant to move and pay all the moving costs.
Right. Or I can add on fees. So maybe I add on a fee for property management. Okay.
Renewal fee, rent renewal fee.
Rent renewal fee. So all kinds of fees that I can add on, which ends up kind of being the same over time as far as a market rent increase, but they hurt the tenant more, because if I charge a rent renewal, a lease renewal fee, maybe that's a $500 fee. Now that's a lot harder for that tenant to come up with. So, those are the things that have to be considered when people who are trying to help tenants actually end up hurting them by putting in restraints on what landlords can do. Landlords are not going to behave in ways that are detrimental to themselves, right?
They're just not going to behave.
Look, as a landlord, I'm not going to engage in a business practice that is detrimental to me. I'm going to want to keep a tenant that is a good tenant, that pays on time, that keeps the property up, that doesn't harass me. Those are tenants that I want to keep. And those are tenants that are not going to get exorbitant rent increases. But if the government is tying my hands regarding what I can do with that property, then all of a sudden I'm going to push everything to the limit in order to keep up. So those are things to be considered. I know everybody has a different opinion on this, and that's great. And I welcome all opinions, so please feel free to put them down in the comments. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm just giving you examples of what the possibilities are out there and what happens when the government gets involved with rent control.
And there's this economics term called excess burden of a tax. And literally what it says is anytime there is a tax charged, there's an excess burden that is paid in excess of the tax, because the burden gets passed on to other people in such a way because the person being taxed wants to distribute the tax down line, so to speak, right? And that same principle is what happens with rent control, okay? And the only places rent control have really worked have been places like New York City and San Francisco, but the problem with those areas is now no one wants to build new rental units because they don't want to get stuck in rent control, or they try to get these variances and say, well, we're not in rent control. They have this in downtown Boston, where there's this part of town that's booming wildly because that area is exempt from rent control. So these beautiful new towers are going in with all this pretty expensive, rentals that are going in because they can charge them. They're not stuck with rent control because they actually convinced the city of Boston. It's like, okay, that old area of town, you could keep rent controlling it, but we want to build some new stuff. And the problem is you now choke out people who are trying to rent, and now you don't even have enough rental. So it never works. So if you're on the legislature in Nevada and you're watching this, please consider all this actual economic stuff before you guys go and start doing crazy things, because it generally doesn't work the way you want, and you can't take into account everything that's possibly going to happen.
Right. The unintended consequences a lot of times are more harmful than the problem you're trying to solve.
Right. And you can't make a new person build housing. You can't do that. Remember, we have 8.2 people per hour moving here, and we need to accommodate these people. And the problem is just going to increase.
Right. So was this interesting? Did we talk about something controversial? Please leave us a comment and let us know. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you will be notified next time we put something controversial out. We welcome all opinions, so please leave us a note, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.
Bye.